to hear your message of what it means to remain faithful to you, even when we are filled with despair. Gracious Lord, help fill our hearts in this time. Help us to be attentive to your word, to seek after you as Job did, even when everything has gone wrong. Help us, Lord, to be lifted up by you through your story of your people and those who have remained faithful to you. Do this in spite of me or through me. For this we pray. Amen. So as we began last week, a look at Job, I will go over a quick recap of what we know about this story of Job. Again, not a history per se, not listed as a history, not considered a history by the Jewish text. So it's considered wisdom literature, which means that it is probably parable-like, that Job was not really a person, or at least that the story about Job has been embellished or exaggerated in order to get the point across. Job's story starts out with Job as being the most upright, the most righteous, the most good person that you could possibly imagine. A person after God's own heart, so much so that God is even bragging about him in heaven to the other angels and to all of the entire company that is there. And Job, for his part here on earth, is so devout that his children are blessed and offered giving a sacrifice for each and every day, just in case they may have had a stray thought. Because that's how devout Job is. But his children in our story have shown themselves to be a loving and caring family, children that seem to have been raised right. There are 7 brothers who take care of their sisters, and they all eat dinner together each night, changing who hosts at which house. And Job, on his part, has become exceedingly wealthy, and he's very comfortable in his living. And then after a conversation in heaven between God and the devil, everything begins to fall apart. First, all of Job's cattle, his sheep, his camels, his donkeys are stolen, and all of the slaves that were tending them were killed. And then that same night, as all of his children are gathered together for their evening meal, the house caves in upon them, and he has to bury all 10 of his children at one time. His livelihood and his family are lost in an instant, and yet Job still is faithful. And so God continues to speak highly of him in heaven, and the devil once again decides that he needs to have a test. And so God allows it, and that next day Job finds himself stricken with all manners of illness, one in which he is sore, or has open sores and infections from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head that are itchy and painful to the point that he cannot wear clothing, and he has his bones deformed, and he is given illness so that he cannot keep food in his body, and he is in constant and continual pain. And it is in this place that we find Job sitting there naked on a pile of ashes, mourning the loss of his children. Perhaps they're even the ashes of his children's home. And he's sitting there, having lost everything, his health, his ways of life, his children. And his wife comes and says, "Curse God, so that he will kill you and I can be rid of you." And then she leaves. And that's the last we hear of her. And so our story picks up this morning with Job's lament, Job's crying out to God. He is in the full throes of depression. And some could argue for good reason. His entire life is shattered. And he cries out to God, God, curse the day that I was born. God, curse even the night on which I was conceived. I do not wish to be alive. I wish that I had been born dead, stillborn, and thrown away. Because at least in death I would not be suffering now. At least in death I would have my peace and my rest. I think where Job is at in his life is a place that we as people can relate to. It's part of the power of the story of Job. That his crying out, his words of depression, are words that are familiar to the hearts of many that surround us. The world, this community, in fact, is filled with people who are struggling with depression on that kind of level, where they wish that they had never been born, where they wish that they were dead so that at least they wouldn't have to continue on suffering and what they are currently going through. And I think the power of the story of Job is that even in that place, even with that kind of depression and despair, that level of hopelessness, Job is still crying out to God. He is still looking to God for relief. He's not choosing to take his own life. He's instead looking for help and looking for God for that help. The God who had blessed him with everything before, the God who has the power to restore all things. And I think that for this part of the story of Job, that's what we need to take away. Is that even in our darkest moments, even when we are undergoing depression, we still need to cling to God and look to God for hope. And that hope can come in a multitude of ways. It can come through doctors now. It can even come through the marvels of modern science. But I think when we leave the God part out of our solution, we ultimately open ourselves up for only a temporary fix. Job put God first. His first choice for help. And in the coming weeks, we will find that God is faithful. That the story of Job does not end here in great depression and in sorrow and in everything being torn apart, but that the story of Job works its way to restoration. In some ways, Job's fortunes are resurrected by God, just as our hope is in the resurrection of Christ. In the coming weeks, we are going to continue to be here amidst the struggle with Job. We are going to continue to hear how he lives with all of these bad things that happen. How Job still represents the epitome of that bad things really do happen to good people. Next week in particular, we'll hear about how his friends try to comfort him or to solve his problems for him. We'll hear how they use platitudes, those things that people say to try to make us feel better, like tomorrow is a new day, or this too shall pass. And we'll hear that even though they seem like the right thing to say, they really aren't that helpful for those who are in this place. And yet, even despite that, Job will still cling to God. It is my hope that as a people, that even when we are in this place of depression, even when we are in our moments of darkness, even when everything that has and can go wrong has done so, that we would still look to God to make it right. Because it is in that hope and that hope alone that we will find our salvation, our restoration, that we will find the ending that we are searching for. So may we continue to suffer alongside Job as we look to God to restore us and to make us or bring us into joy. Amen.